Hi, welcome back to the Shifting Schools podcast. Our special mini-series on the power of play continues with an incredible expert. If you are an early years educator or you've got a child who is around that age group, this is going to be an episode for sure that you're going to want to listen to. But also, if you're an adult like me who wants more play in their life, this is also going to be an episode to queue up. We are speaking with Dr. Peg Oliveira, who is a child development expert and activist. Since receiving her doctorate in developmental psychology, she's advocated for fair pay for early childhood educators, assistance for working parents, and equitable access to high-quality education. Currently, Dr. Oliveira is the founding director of the Gesell Program in early childhood at the Yale Child Study Center. And you're going to hear a lot about the research that Dr. Oliveira does, as well as the reminders that Peg has for us when it comes to the importance of play being personal. Before we get into this dynamic conversation with an incredible expert, we've got a quick word from our show sponsor.
Discover the power of acknowledgement with Libra. In a world where every staff member's dedication shapes the future, recognizing their efforts becomes our mission. Libra transforms your school into a place where achievements, big and small, are celebrated daily, creating a ripple effect of motivation and pride. Join the recognition revolution with Libra, where every achievement is a cause for celebration. For more information and a free demo, contact me at jeff@shiftingschools.com today.
Librarians, meet MacEnvision, the future of library management. With a student-centered design, MacEnvision's intuitive interface and seamless navigation ensures that your students find the information they need quickly and effortlessly. Discover how MacEnvision can transform your school at macen.com/MacEnvision.
And with that, please welcome to the Shifting Schools podcast, Dr. Peg Oliveira. I'm so excited to be speaking with you today. You have so much expertise on our topic, and I'd love to kick things off by asking you, what is perhaps just one myth? I know that you probably tackle so many, but one myth about play that you aspire to correct through the work that you do as the director of the Gesell Program in early childhood at the Yale Child Study Center.
Yeah, thank you, Tricia. I will try to keep it to just one myth because I do think that there are many more than one myths about play. But the big one that we try to tackle at Gesell is that play is entirely and only and solely free play. That we use the word play to define a whole spectrum of kinds of activities that individuals, children and adults, can engage in that vary depending on who initiates the activity and then who directs the activity. So free play, for example, the kind of play that like when I say to people, how do you remember playing as a child? They tend to say things like, oh, we ran through the neighborhood, we hung out in the forest, whatever. That is free play. And so how we think of free play is it is child initiated. The child says, I've got a great idea. Let's build a fort. And then it's child directed. And then the child or children proceed to decide which sticks to use and which blankets to use and where to put the fort. And there's very little adult engagement there. Child initiated, child directed, free play. And that's great. Free play is amazing. The research tells us, and probably our own experiences support that we need free play. Children need free play. We need lots of opportunities to have child-initiated, child-directed activities. And my opinion right now is that none of us get enough of that. That said, there are other kinds of play. And so what you can also think about it, and the one myth-busting kind of play I want to share is when an adult initiates or an other initiates. It could also be a peer, but let's think about it as an adult initiates, and then we allow the child to direct. And that's different, right? Why would we ever want to do that? If we think about play as an integral tool to supporting children's learning and development, then we can imagine that there are really good reasons why we as the adult might want to initiate a type of activity. In free play, it's hit or miss whether a child is going to engage with a very specific kind of what we call explicit learning goal. If you have specific kinds of numeracy goals for children, depending on their developmental stage, or literacy goals, or science goals, or even history content that you want them to learn about, it's unlikely that through free play, they will encounter that content, practice that skill, and then have the right supports in place to scaffold them to get better at that skill. But through adult initiated, but then child directed activities, an adult, be it a parent or a teacher, can consciously think about where the child is in their development, what skills they currently have. And as Vygotsky taught us, think about the zone of proximal development, he called it. What's that next level? What's the next rung on the ladder of this child's growth and learning that we can support them, scaffold them into doing? If you think about learning to ride a bicycle, for example, you often start with holding the back of the seat or giving them training wheels. In all skills, there are training wheels that we can offer children along the way. And so an adult can very consciously create opportunities for a child to engage with specific materials that will lead to these numeracy or literacy skills, or specific activities that will lead to content that you want them to engage with. But then once you create the environment, offer the materials, the opportunities, you back off. We call it knowing when to play and when to get out of the way, right? And then you back off and you see where the child takes the learning. And sometimes kids are weird, right? So sometimes they take what you offer them in directions you never imagined. And instead of thinking of that as a wrong direction, we simply think of it as a child-directed experience. It tells you a lot about what the child already understands, what they're thinking about, what's important to them, what's culturally relevant to them, which can sometimes be a surprise to some educators, even to some parents, right? And so allowing the child to then offer us back some information about where they are in their development, what they're capable of, what they're interested in through their own direction of that play allows us to then better meet their needs and then come in with that next level just right question or just right material or just right opportunity that's going to lead them to that next level skill, as Vygotsky taught us. So that's the big myth I like to address when working with parents and educators is free play is amazing, but it's not the only kind of play. And then I know I'm cheating, but there's a side myth is that, yes, we want to play with children. For sure, adults want to play with children, but adults can be really bossy. And so to be conscious of when we are directing too much, initiating something, it can be really useful, but then stepping back and allowing the child to direct can also be really useful.
I love that. And longtime listeners of this show are probably so tired of me making comparisons between topics and my interactions with my dog. But what you're talking about in terms of knowing when to play and get out of the way, I feel like this is like a frequent thing that is people talk a lot about in the dog community of sometimes you do want to do these like mental stimulation games, or play is also a big part of training with dogs. But then also there's the time just to let the pups like run around, enjoy just the sticks in the yard kind of a thing. And I feel like that conversation happens, again, in the dog community in a way that, of course, we need that community louder and more frequently in schools and in parent and caretaker spaces. And it's interesting to me that in one context, we seem so comfortable with that conversation. And in a different context, it's also about development, that we're not as comfortable with that conversation.
Oh, I love that. I have 2 dogs myself, and I definitely compare how I raise my daughter and how I raise my dogs. And there's a lot of similarities, actually, but there are some differences. But I've never really thought about it this way, so thank you. Yeah, there are times when we want to train, right? But there are times when we also want to allow the dog or the spouse or the partner or whatever to practice, right, what they've learned. And you can only practice that if you're not being directed every step of the way. And it also requires some space to make mistakes, right? And to get it wrong. And in children's play, especially related to development and learning, getting it wrong is not a bad thing. It's a self-directing process, right? And if you never get it wrong, first of all, when you do finally get something wrong, you're not going to know how to handle it. And second, that's not how we learn. We don't learn by getting it right all the time. We learn by hypothesizing, having some wrong answers. Piaget talked about this as simulation and accommodation of our schemas, right? So we have a schema, which is like a frame on the world. And we're offered information constantly about how the world works. And the brain really wants to make everything fit nicely into our current schema. And so it tries first to assimilate, to make it make sense with how I understand the world now. And some of us can get really good at figuring out all sorts of mental gymnastics to make whatever we see make sense with our current schema, right? But what we try to do is teach cognitive flexibility, right? The ability for individuals to utilize their cognitive capacities to say, hey, this new information doesn't actually fit my schema really well. So I need to accommodate. I need to expand my understanding and, in a very scary process, perhaps blow it up, change it, and take in this new information and create a new schema that makes more sense with this new data, right? That is something that the world really needs right now, and is really important that we start to allow children the opportunity at these young ages to experiment with and explore and recognize that we're not always right. And our understanding can shift and change based on new information. And if we don't do that at young ages, how can we expect adults to do it?
Yeah, I completely, entirely agree with that. And then for schools who are getting it right from the early years, how do we make sure that we don't strip that away as students are getting older? You have me thinking about theater sports, theater games that also seek to, there's new information. How do we adjust and build together? Dr. Oliveira, the research about play you mentioned is pretty conclusive. This is very good for us at all ages. And you, of course, have published some of this research. I'll be sure to link in the show notes to an article from the Journal of Social and Emotional Learning that you co-authored. And it's got this really interesting recipe of 5 key ingredients for play. I love that. And I think that's a great conversation starter for all of us. How are these ingredients showing up in your life or not?
Thank you for tuning in to Shifting Schools. Let's pause our discussion to spotlight Libra HQ, a breakthrough in using AI to deepen connections within organizations. Imagine an environment where every staff member feels truly seen and valued. This is the heart of Libra's mission. Libra transforms how leaders celebrate and recognize the personal and professional milestones of their team members. It's not just about reminders. Libra's AI dives deeper, offering insight into enhanced team cohesion and promote a culture where support and acknowledgement are paramount. Picture a school where every individual is acknowledged, from work achievements to personal victories, creating a culture of appreciation in just minutes a day. In these challenging times, where the demands on educators have never been higher, Libra offers a way for school leaders to lead with true empathy and compassion, ensuring every team member feels an integral part of their community's success. Discover how Libra can revolutionize your school's culture. For a demo, contact me at jeff@shiftingschools.com. Let's build a future where every educator and staff member feels connected and valued. And now, let's get back to our conversation.
If we know that play is so useful, so meaningful, so good for us, what can we do, or what would you like to see more of when it comes to making play more accessible?
Yeah. The first thing to understand is that when it's not happening, it's not typically because anyone thinks it's a bad thing, right? Nor is it that people have poor intentions for children. The first thing to recognize is that everyone who's in education, everyone who's parenting really wants the right thing to happen for children, right? But we sometimes get misguided about what the best path is to achieve some of the same goals. And so we all want children to actualize their potential and succeed in life. But we have, as of late, as an educational system, become very anxious, nervous about outcomes, about what are our kids really capable of, what are they learning, and are they doing it fast enough? The pandemic has only exacerbated this problem. I'm sure many of your listeners have heard people talk about this learning loss during the pandemic, talking about myth busting. The first thing I want to say is children don't typically lose learning, right? So that phrase alone is just a misnomer. What may have happened, possibly, is that they learn different things and they're learning at a different pace, our 2018 kids, right? And that is to be expected because they had different experiences. What we, as the adults in the equation, maybe need to do is honestly relax a little bit and start to open our eyes to who these new kids are coming out of the pandemic, what skills and abilities they have that may even be more interesting and creative and potentially a kind of resilience that they may have that we weren't seeing in prior generations. And so to just frame it as maybe they're different, right? Then rather than maybe they're behind or late or slow or we need to catch them up. But it's good intentions, right? That then lead us to this nervous, we need to get them the math skills they need. We need to get them the literacy skills they're lacking. And then in that nervousness to do it quickly, we think that the best way to get there are these sort of direct instruction methodologies. And the sort of red herring there, the disguise, right, that those kinds of learning approaches offer are quick results, right? You teach a kid something directly, they take a test on it immediately, and they show you they know it. But what we don't do in education typically is go back in 6 months and 12 months and 18 months and see if that learning really sticks. And what the research tells us is that direct instruction, little lecture halls in 4th grade, that learning does not stick. It's not how kids learn. And you talked about the 5 ways that I describe learning to happen best. And so what the research tells us is that learning that is active, engaged, meaningful, social, and iterative, which means building on what you already know, that kind of learning sticks. And so worksheets are not active, they're not engaging, they're not social. Lectures, not active, not engaged, not social. It's not that we have to throw those tools away. It's that in our recipe of creating a learning experience, we want to have the right measures, right, of some direct instruction, but also opportunities for kids to engage with that content in active, engaged, meaningful, social, and iterative ways. And that's when we see that kids own skills and content. They make it their own. They make it relevant to their life. They understand why it's useful in their life, and then it sticks. And so our work is to encourage educators to move towards these more active, engaged, meaningful, social, and iterative ways of learning, which we call play-based learning or inquiry-based learning, not throw away the worksheets and the direct instruction, because sometimes you just have to tell a kid about the Civil War, right? But then for them to really understand why it matters to them, you want to bring that home. You want to explain how it's impacting, why those civil rights battles are meaningful to us today, right? And then let them engage with individuals with whom, whose lives have been impacted by those fights. That's how kids learn. Let them interview those people and really learn about the content, right? If we can, but that takes a lot of time, and it makes us nervous sometimes because it's not the direct instruction of the skill and the content we're going to test on. So if this isn't a child problem we're having coming out of the pandemic, I think it's an adult problem we're having of anxiety around what the kids know. And if we just relax a little bit and go back to what the research tells us is how kids learn, I think we're going to be okay.
Greatly appreciate that messaging. And it's interesting because your advice there on thinking about the adults relaxing, I just finished the book that I feel like my LinkedIn feed is full of folks talking about. It's Jonathan Haidt's The Anxious Generation. And of course, he's talking about the young learners that you're talking about. And he does have quite a big focus on the need for more free play. I feel like the response is ignoring that part of the book and just focusing on the banning of phones, which I think is interesting. But I was also surprised he addresses a lot. A barrier to unstructured play is a lot of parents and caretakers not feeling comfortable with it anymore. He's got a great image in the book of a city park in New York City where it has a sign addressed to the adults saying, your child is fine without your advice. Let them play. And I do feel that we're in a space where we need a lot more coaching for the adults to, find our center again, come back to what is school for? What is learning for? What do we want it to be for? And your advice about remembering that our students are different, to me, that seems like it should be an accessible foothold for us because we go through that cycle every generation, regardless of a pandemic, right? The learners are always changing and the world is different. So I feel like it completely makes sense. But I think that point on looking at where the concern or the worry or the anxiety, where's it coming from, is such a good conversation to make sure we're sustaining.
Yeah, pretty much everything we do with children, we recognize that we need to start with the adults. And so this is no different. And I think that we are seeing some anxious kids. I think we are seeing a shift towards a more anxious generation. But I think we, the adults in this generation, need to take some responsibility for the fact that they are tiny sponges who are playing off of our own emotions and feelings. And so we as the grown-ups need to start at home and become a bit more mindful of what our own emotions are, how we're expressing those emotions to children, what the emotional currency is in our classrooms, in our homes, and acknowledge that we may be playing a very big role in setting a context for children to be growing up more anxious, right? It's not just about them. Yeah, and so with that, certainly my advocacy is around how do we allow for more play and more child-directed engagements at home and at school. But related to that, I also work with teachers and I encourage parents to think about their own ways in which they find joy, right? And it's not dissimilar to what we do with children, right? It's what kind of self-initiated, self-directed activities do you make space for in your life? And I personally probably err on the side of too much in that way. I make lots of time to be sure that almost daily I am outdoors playing tennis, swimming. I do yoga regularly, and I have a teenage daughter who keeps me active as well. So I certainly can say I walk my talk in ensuring that I have free play. But that said, I also try to walk my talk around the spectrum of play, right? And so not everything is free play. And I have very consciously chosen a professional path that allows me, and I'm very blessed by this, I recognize that, allows me some guardrails, right? There's like other initiated guardrails around what I get to do in my professional life. But within that space, I get to be I'm encouraged, in fact, to be very creative, to follow my curiosities, to explore questions, to make mistakes, and to then self-correct. And for me, that has felt very fulfilling and joyful. And so I encourage other adults to really think about how to make more space for both that free play, but also that guided play, even when there needs to be some directing to or initiating of guardrails for your life. Can you find space to be self-directing and self-empowering and sort of creating your own path within those guardrails?
And I wonder if, with some of the examples you gave, if there's the opportunity for both structured and unstructured play. You mentioned tennis, so I feel like, is there just playing around and trying to have the fastest serve you can, or I don't know, like playing tennis in a different way, or it's a giant tennis ball versus you're doing some concentrated drills. Like gardening comes to mind for me because I feel like gardening is playful for me. Sometimes there's I'm just going to experiment with maybe what's going to work here versus weeding, which maybe doesn't feel as playful, but I do get pleasure from that, and it's time in nature. Are there certain kind of like adult play methods that you're thinking there's opportunities for both? And I appreciate you mentioning this because it really only dawned on me just now. I count gardening as play. And I'm like, I wonder, does that count? What are some of the other, does cooking count? Or is it all how we approach it?
Yeah, that's so great. This conference, I've had this sort of debate a lot with adults because in addition to play, I've taught yoga for over 20 years and I teach mindfulness. And so in doing sort of self-care, care for the caregiver, we call it workshops, how do you fill your own cup in order to be able to be in a giving profession like parenting, like educating, nursing, whatever. We often come to this, I like to do X, does that count? And the answer is only, right, is it, to me, what I'm looking for in my life and what I hope to encourage people to find is what I call a neurorestorative experience, right? So does the experience soothe your nervous system? Does it make you feel calmer? And in the middle of a tennis match, when I'm very frustrated, I'm like, this is not very neurorestorative. But in a sense, it is, because struggle can be good, right? If it's productive struggle, it's good. If you're improving, if you're working towards something, if you feel like there's progress, then that can be good. And so the question that comes up a lot, gardening is great, and I feel like that's an easy one. Yeah, of course, it's neurorestorative. The question that does come up a lot is video games. I really like to go home, crash in front of the television, and play video games. And my question is, does that help you go to sleep at night or does it keep you up? And that answer you typically suggests whether it's neurorestorative or if it's exciting, you're already on alert nervous system. And in particular, that fight, flight, or freeze back of the brain part of your nervous system. If that's the case, it might be fun, but it may not necessarily be neurorestorative. And that doesn't mean you can't do it. And that doesn't mean it's not playful. Just know that for us all to get more in touch with the impact that our choices are having on our nervous system so that we can make conscious choices about like when I drink an espresso and when I drink an herbal tea, right? So that I can utilize these tools appropriately and not be shocked or surprised or at their mercy, right? The same is true for any activities we choose and all kinds of play.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Mackin Educational Resources has once again partnered with us for our summer mini-series. Thank you to Mackin for continuing to be a partner of the Shifting Schools community. Their new product, Mackin Vision, is the future of library management. Created with your students' need at the forefront, Mackin Vision offers a user-friendly interface that simplifies navigation, making it easy for students to find what they need. This state-of-the-art system includes features like intuitive browsing, secure multi-level access, multimedia searching, and whole school rostering. Additionally, it has a teacher library portal, aggregated dashboard, live analytics, and centralized reporting. Mackin Vision is designed to streamline your school's library operations. Learn more about how Mackinversion can benefit your school at mackin.com/MackinVision. Schedule your free demonstration and experience the future today.
You have me wondering now, and it's probably like bad podcaster practice to recommend another show in the middle of this one, but Design Matters is one of my favorite shows. Debbie Millman's an incredible interviewer, and she recently had on Dr. Emily Nagowski, who was talking about her research into sex. And she mentioned there's this misconception we don't actually have a sex drive. What we all have are accelerators and brakes, and they look different in everyone. And so I wonder, does play work differently for all of us? As you said, are there certain methods of play where it's the espresso and there's other methods of play that are the herbal tea?
Oh yeah, I think so for sure. I think there's intrinsic ways in which certain activities excite the brain or calm the brain, but we all start from a unique sort of starting point, right? And so some of us, and in different days, each of us is at a different point. Some days I go in and I'm already high strung, very back brain excited. And what I need is to be met there. So I may not be able to go directly into a meditation at that point, but I might need a bit of a vigorous yoga class to meet me there and then bring me back down to where I can sit in meditation, right? Other days I am dragging, maybe even depressed or sad or having some lower emotions. And what I need is to be met there and brought up. So I may not be ready to jump right into tennis at that point, but instead I need to take a walk and warm up and get my brain sort of turned on. And so call it brakes or accelerators. I think of it as meeting my nervous system where I'm at and then moving it towards balance. And sometimes you start below balance and sometimes you start above balance. Sometimes you start left of balance and right of balance. But the idea is to become better in tune with where you are so that you can utilize these tools appropriately. And then as the adult in the adult-child equation, we teach a lot on unbiased, objective observation, allowing the child to truly show us who they are, where they are, what they're feeling, not through their words, because even our sixth graders don't typically have the language to do that, but rather through their behaviors. Can we become such good child behavior detectives that they are constantly dropping clues for us that lead us to understand who they are, where they are, and most importantly, what they need so that we can offer those just right experiences. And sometimes you meet a whole class that's really amped up and you have to meet them there and help them back to balance. And sometimes it's individual kids who are in need of that kind of support. But these different activities are, again, like ingredients in a recipe. And you can, a good observer can consciously and unbiasedly acknowledge where the kids are and then make some conscious choices about what activities to offer because of that.
And you have me thinking about how a lot of that comes back to trust and power sharing in the classroom too, because I feel like the further I got into my career as an educator, you're right, like you're able to pick up, it's like a palpable energy in the room that will cue you into, oh, the way that I thought I was going to launch this is, we've got to do something a little bit different. But it's respecting the folks in the room as well and acknowledging I may have thought I had my plan, but it might not necessarily be the best for our group as a community. To what extent do you think that observation and noticing of others and how to help regulate emotions for a small community that's a class, I think it's also really difficult to be able to do that if we're not aware of what's happening for ourselves. I'm thinking of the multiple times it's, oh, wow, I've come down with this horrific cold. Oh, yeah, last week I was really stressed out and not paying attention to that. Is any of the work that you do also looking at, we've got to get better at recognizing what's going on inside of ourselves?
Yeah. And sometimes it's the sneaky side of my work because honestly, we get brought in to deal with the kids, right? Help us with the kids. We have so many challenging behaviors in the classroom. What can we do with these kids? This group of kids is so different than 2019. And what we do is, again, start at home. And there's lots of work around how to teach self-regulation and lots of curriculum around how to teach self-regulation. But the best way to teach self-regulation is through the process of co-regulation, right? And that's just a fancy term for what you beautifully just described, right? The best way to think about it or understand it is when we think about a baby, right? A baby cries and we don't say, what skills does this baby need to learn to stop crying, self-regulate, right? But in truth, that is what we're doing. We're thinking, how do we teach this child to eventually self-soothe and acknowledge their feelings? And so we want all of that in the long term. But in the moment, baby's crying, what do? We don't go in with a self-regulation curriculum or lecture. We pick the baby up, we hug the baby, we rock the baby, we soothe the baby, right? That's co-regulation, right? And if you as the adult go in completely losing your cool, fuming, anxious, it's really hard to calm a baby from that space, right? Step one is, can I find my center? Can I self-regulate? Can I go in as a calm anchor for this child in their emotional storm, right? And that process is called co-regulation. Through that, the baby can utilize you, the adult, as that emotional anchor of calm and begins to learn that emotions come and go, right? That I may feel badly right now, but there's hope. Something will come in. And there's even an entire hormonal process that goes on in the baby's body that says, I'm anxious, something's wrong, I'm hungry, I'm scared. Importantly and appropriately, the brain says, this is an emergency. I need to set off these stress hormones. But the entering of the soothing adult, the caring other, actually elicits a whole other set of hormones that kind of wash those away. And that's healthy, right? That's the process we need. It's not the stress hormones that are a problem. It's when the calming hormones don't come washing them away afterwards. That's when we see stress as a killer, right? But so long as we have those ups and downs and that circle of I get stressed, someone helps soothe me, I get calm again, it's okay to keep going through that cycle. And you learn through that process self-regulation. But it's through the co-regulation, and it requires us as the adults to also have some self-regulation skills and teach that child. And so you take that baby example and you take it to your 5-year-old or your 15-year-old, and it looks maybe a little different at each developmental stage, but the process is the same. It's, can I be the emotional anchor for this child so that they learn that emotions come and go?
Next time I'm on a plane, I am going to have to say to the flight attendant, because what you're describing, I'm a very nervous flyer. So anytime there's turbulence, I'm always like, where's the flight attendant? I'm looking. Are they worried? They're not worried. It makes me feel better. So I'm going to have to say, thank you for being my emotional anchor on this
Right.
flight, because that's what they're doing.
That's
Thank
exactly
you for that.
Right. And that's what we do, right? And that's what babies do. And that's what kids do. And that's what 15-year-olds do, is they look to us and they see what's in your eyes. What are you feeling? And if we can reassure them, it goes a long way towards teaching self-regulation.
And this is, again, along our conversation of play. I think in athletics, there's a great example of that too, because I feel like if you're watching athletes at the top level, I've been loving WNBA season is back. And if we're down by 2, there's 3 seconds on the clock, the players are huddled up with their coach. Their coach is not like pulling out her hair, and they are calm. They are talking through, this is exactly what we're going to do. So I feel like that's an example of play where we've got maybe that emotional anchoring happening too.
That's right on. Yeah. Yeah. Look to the person who can come up with the plan, but from a calm, conscious space. You don't necessarily, sometimes you want the emergency plan, but if it's not an immediate emergency, then let's take the space to be conscious and more planful about how we respond.
I think you probably have our audience really feeling like play matters, play's important. I want more of it, not just in the summer, but hopefully beyond. In closing, can you leave us with a piece of advice how might we just better embed play in our day-to-day lives that doesn't necessarily require I'm all of a sudden going to have to find a tennis club that I can join, or all of a sudden, like, I love gardening, but I'm also like, my goodness, gardening can be expensive. It's dangerous. What are some sort of easy, low-hanging fruit options for folks who are saying, yeah, I want to be better with it as a daily practice? What can I do?
Yeah. First, right off, it does not need to be expensive and it does not need to take a lot of time. But what it does require is you asking yourself some questions about what makes me feel better, right? What does feel soothing? What does feel joyful? And then whatever that answer is, do that a little bit more and just a little bit more, right? It goes a long way. And so that's the free play model. But additionally, how can I, in my own life every day, in my small choices, prioritize joy, right? And sometimes there are adult hard things that we need to do, but more often there are moments where we could choose something that makes us feel better, and to just consciously make the priority on an ongoing basis to make choices that help us feel better. I think that helps a lot.
Thank you very much for your time, your expertise. Again, the research that you've done, I'm going to be sure to link to that over in the show notes so that folks can learn all about the amazing work that you're doing. Thank you so much for giving your expertise and your time today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.